Have you ever wondered why some people stay calm and unshaken, no matter how hard life gets? Imagine losing everything you cherish in a single moment. Could you still find peace? Today, let me take you on the journey of John Miller, a man who faced unimaginable losses, yet held onto his happiness with quiet strength. His story will challenge how you see life's toughest moments and might even change the way you face your own challenges. The story takes us to a small town in the American West, where John Miller, a calm and resilient man in his 70s, lives a humble life with his beloved white horse, Silver. In this small town, life is simple, and everyone knows everyone. But even here, John stands out. He's a modest man, spending his days quietly working his land, often keeping to himself. Yet, he's known for something remarkable: his horse, Silver. Silver isn't just any horse. With a shimmering white coat and a presence as calm and dignified as John's own, Silver has become legendary in this little town. Some say he's the most beautiful horse they've ever seen, a creature of almost mythical grace. To John, Silver is more than an animal. He's family. Every day, John spends hours caring for him, brushing his coat, and talking to him as if he were a lifelong friend. Their bond is undeniable, built over years of loyalty and respect. The townsfolk often say, "It's like Silver knows exactly what John's thinking." Over the years, Silver's reputation grows, and travelers from neighboring towns come to see him, with some even offering to buy him. One day, a particularly wealthy merchant arrives, offering John a sum that could change his life, enough to afford luxuries he'd never imagined. But John, with his gentle, unwavering smile, simply says, "Silver isn't for sale. He's family." The townspeople can't understand why a man of John's humble means would turn down such an opportunity for wealth and comfort. But to John, the choice is simple. Silver isn't just a possession. He's a friend, a partner, and a witness to John's life, a piece of his heart and history. One morning, as John walked to the stable, he was met with an unsettling sight. Silver was gone, vanished without a trace. The news of his missing horse spread like wildfire, and soon the whole town was buzzing with gossip. Within hours, people began to gather near John's empty stable, exchanging curious glances and whispers. Pity mixed with amusement hung in the air, but the most common reaction was a judgmental smirk. One villager muttered, shaking his head, "He had the chance to sell that horse for a fortune and live comfortably. But no, he clung to it like it was made of gold." Another nodded. "Imagine, turning down all that money just to keep an animal. Now look at him, Silver's gone, and he's left with nothing." Some were harsher, openly mocking John for what they saw as a foolish attachment. "If only he'd been a bit smarter," one man chuckled. "He could have spent his last years in luxury instead of struggling on this tiny patch of land." A few others even laughed at the irony, convinced that John's decision to keep Silver was, at best, naive, and at worst, outright foolish. For many, John's loss of Silver felt like poetic justice, a kind of punishment for refusing to seize his good fortune. An elderly woman remarked to a neighbor, "Sometimes life gives you a chance, and if you don't take it, you're left with regrets." Poor John, too stubborn to see what he had, and now it's all gone. Despite their harsh words, everyone watched John closely, eager to see how he would react. They expected anger, frustration, perhaps even desperation. They were sure that, this time, John would regret his decision to keep Silver, but what they saw instead left them speechless. John stood quietly by the stable, gazing at the empty space where Silver once stood. He listened to the whispers and laughter around him, but he didn't react. No anger, no sadness, no attempt to defend his decision. Instead, he remained still, a faint, knowing smile playing on his lips. One of his neighbors, unable to contain his curiosity, finally asked, "So, John, what do you think of your decision now? Don't you wish you'd taken the money?" John looked at him with gentle eyes and replied softly, "Who's to say if this is good or bad?" His words puzzled the villagers. They had expected him to be devastated, perhaps even regretful, but John's calm demeanor seemed out of place, almost unnatural. "How can he be so calm?" they murmured among themselves. "He's lost his most valuable possession, and he acts like it doesn't matter." But John didn't explain further. He simply returned to his modest home, going about his day as if nothing had happened. To him, Silver's disappearance was a fact, but it wasn't necessarily a misfortune. He didn't know if it was a blessing in disguise or a genuine loss, and he wasn't interested in guessing. Life, as John saw it, was too complex to be judged by a single event. As days went by, John carried on with his life as before, unaffected by the townspeople's words or the apparent loss of his beloved horse. Little did they know, this was only the beginning of a series of unexpected twists that would challenge not only John's outlook, but also the very beliefs of everyone around him. A few weeks passed, and most people assumed that Silver was gone forever. But then, one morning, something incredible happened. As dawn broke over the quiet town, John walked out of his house toward the stable, expecting just another ordinary day. But, as he drew closer, he stopped in his tracks, frozen in astonishment. There, standing proudly in front of the stable, was Silver, and he hadn't come back alone. Surrounding him was a small herd of wild horses, their eyes wide with curiosity and the untamed energy of creatures unaccustomed to people. Silver's brilliant white coat gleamed in contrast to the earthy tones of the wild horses, making him appear as if he'd led them home to John. The sight was nothing short of miraculous. News spread quickly through the town, and within an hour, people were flocking to John's property, marveling at the spectacle and murmuring in awe and disbelief. "Can you believe it?" one man exclaimed. "Not only has Silver returned, but he's brought a fortune with him," another villager added excitedly. "This must be a sign of good luck, a blessing from above." The same townspeople who had once mocked John for refusing to sell Silver now praised him for his wisdom in keeping the horse. They eagerly gathered around him, urging him to seize this unexpected fortune. "Sell them, John," a neighbor insisted, gesturing to the herd. "With so many horses, you could earn enough to retire comfortably." "Yes," another agreed. "This is your chance to turn a loss into something grand. Think of the money these wild horses could bring." The villagers, seeing only fortune in the arrival of the herd, were thrilled for John. They pictured the wealth and status he could achieve by selling the horses, unable to understand why he wouldn't leap at the opportunity to improve his life. Yet, amid the excitement, John remained calm. He looked over the herd with a quiet appreciation, as if greeting old friends rather than a newfound source of wealth. The crowd's excited chatter swirled around him, but John stayed grounded, untouched by the fervor. One person, growing impatient, pressed him further. "Aren't you thrilled? What a lucky day for you, John. This is your chance to change everything." John simply smiled and replied, "Who's to say if this is good or bad? Time will tell." The crowd exchanged puzzled glances. They had expected him to be overjoyed, maybe even grateful, but John's composed response baffled them. "Why isn't he more excited?" they whispered. "Can't he see the fortune right in front of him?" John's answer was one of calm acceptance. He didn't oppose the idea of selling the horses, but neither was he bound to the potential wealth they represented. To him, it wasn't his place to judge the event as fortunate or unfortunate. John had learned that life's true meaning often lay beyond immediate gains or losses, and he was willing to wait patiently to see where this twist of fate would lead. As John led the herd into his stable and returned to his daily routine, he remained an enigma to those around him. His quiet detachment made others question their own reactions, their own tendency to label events as good or bad. And though he couldn't have known it yet, this moment was only the beginning of a journey that would test his patience and beliefs in ways he could never have imagined. But fate, it seemed, had more in store for John and his family. As John's son, Michael, took on the task of taming the wild horses, yet another unexpected turn unfolded. Michael, young and full of energy, saw this as his chance to prove himself. He worked tirelessly, gaining the horses' trust and practicing his handling skills, seeing the potential for wealth if he could tame and sell them. But, as anyone familiar with wild animals knows, unpredictability is always a factor. One morning, as Michael was attempting to ride one of the largest and most spirited horses, disaster struck. Spooked by a sudden noise, the horse reared up, throwing Michael forcefully to the ground. In an instant, his leg was broken, a serious injury that left him unable to stand. News of Michael's accident spread quickly, and once again, the townspeople gathered at John's property. But this time, their tone was one of pity mixed with judgment. Some shook their heads and murmured, "Well, there it is. If only he'd sold those horses, this wouldn't have happened." Others added, "He could have lived comfortably, and Michael wouldn't be lying there with a broken leg." To them, Michael's injury was a direct result of John's decision to keep the horses, a decision they saw as stubborn and unwise. They pitied John, seeing this accident as a price paid for clinging to something they considered merely a source of trouble. John, however, felt the weight of his son's injury deeply. Michael was his only child, and seeing him in pain filled him with sorrow. But even with this burden, John remained steady. He tended to Michael with quiet care, offering him encouragement without a trace of anger or regret. When one of the neighbors approached him, hoping to see some hint of remorse, they asked, "Aren't you bitter, John? If you'd sold the horses, none of this would have happened." John looked at them calmly and replied, "Who's to say if this is good or bad? We won't know the whole story until it's over." His response left the townspeople bewildered. Here was a man who, in their eyes, had every reason to feel regret, yet he continued to face each twist of fate with acceptance. For John, these events weren't inherently good or bad. They were simply parts of a larger journey that only time could fully reveal. This didn't mean John was unfeeling or indifferent to Michael's suffering. On the contrary, he was heartbroken to see his son in pain, but he knew that anger and regret would neither heal his son's leg nor change what had happened. By choosing acceptance, John trusted in life's unfolding mysteries, allowing events to happen without the burden of judgment. In the same small town as John lived another man named Billy, whose story was known to everyone. Like John, Billy had faced his own share of hardship, but the way he handled it was a stark contrast to John's quiet resilience. Billy, a strong-willed man in his 40s, had once been known for his determination and hard work. A few years earlier, a terrible storm struck the area, wiping out his entire cattle herd, the very herd he had spent years building and caring for. The loss was devastating, and it left Billy shattered, both financially and emotionally. Unlike John, who had accepted Silver's disappearance with calm acceptance, Billy responded to his loss with bitterness and anger. In the days that followed, Billy's grief quickly turned to frustration, and frustration to resentment. He found people to blame: the weather, bad luck, even the town itself. To Billy, life had dealt him an unfair hand, and he was unable to move past his sense of injustice. "Why did this happen to me?" he would mutter, voice heavy with bitterness. "I did everything right. This isn't fair." As time passed, the weight of Billy's bitterness began to take a toll. He grew isolated, snapping at neighbors who tried to offer comfort or advice. His friends and family, worn out by his negativity, slowly distanced themselves. And, unable to let go of his resentment, Billy stopped taking care of his farm, convinced that any effort would be wasted. His once thriving land began to wither, and debts started piling up. The townsfolk noticed the difference between the two men. John's life had not been without its own trials. His prized horse, Silver, had disappeared, only to return weeks later with a herd of wild horses. But even when John's son, Michael, had been injured while trying to tame them, John had faced each event with a calm acceptance, refusing to label anything as good or bad. John's quiet resilience allowed him to continue his life unburdened by anger or regret. In contrast, Billy's bitterness consumed him, affecting his outlook on everything. His sadness had hardened into resentment, making each day feel heavier than the last. Where John saw life as a series of moments to be accepted, Billy saw only a world full of disappointments. The contrast was striking. As townspeople gathered in the evenings, they would often find themselves reflecting on the two men. What is it, they would wonder, that makes John so calm after everything he's been through, while Billy seems to be sinking deeper and deeper into bitterness? Some said it was simply their nature. Others believed it was John's choice to accept life's challenges without resentment that allowed him to carry on with peace of mind. As time passed, the nation was drawn into war, and even the peaceful town that once seemed so remote was swept up in fear and anxiety. One morning, government officials arrived, bringing a list and calling on the town's young men to join the military effort. Families gathered in the town square as names were read aloud, each person holding their breath, fearing the call of a loved one. Sons, husbands, brothers, nearly every young man in town was conscripted. Michael, however, was spared. The injury that had been a source of hardship months earlier now shielded him from the call of duty. The townspeople, who had once pitied John and questioned his choices, began to see things in a new light. What had seemed like a misfortune now appeared to be a stroke of luck. "Can you believe it?" one neighbor whispered. "If Michael hadn't broken his leg, he'd be going off to war, just like our sons." Another nodded thoughtfully. Who would have thought that such a painful accident could end up saving his life? It's as if life knew better than we did. Gradually, people started to question their judgments. The same villagers who had once criticized John's choices and mocked his calm demeanor now began to see him with a kind of respect, even reverence. They realized that his refusal to label events as good or bad was more than just a quirky outlook. Perhaps, they thought, there was wisdom in his way of letting life unfold without rushing to judge. Curious and eager to hear from him, the townsfolk gathered around John, seeking his perspective. With gentle humility, he shared his insight. "Life," he said, "is full of surprises. What may seem like a tragedy today might bring blessings tomorrow, and what seems like fortune might lead to suffering. Happiness and sorrow aren't always what they appear to be. They're often shaped by how we choose to see them." John paused, looking at the faces around him, many etched with worry for loved ones. "When I lost Silver, I didn't know if it was good or bad. When Michael was hurt, I didn't know if it was good or bad. And now, with him safe at home, I still don't know what the future holds. All I know is this: life is always changing. Trying to cling to one moment as good or bad only brings trouble. True peace comes from accepting each moment as it is and letting go of our need to control every outcome." The crowd listened in silence, struck by the simplicity and depth of John's words. For many, it was the first time they truly understood the wisdom of his philosophy. John wasn't avoiding life's pains. He was embracing its uncertainties with open arms, unburdened by fear or regret. He had learned to live with a sense of acceptance that allowed him to face life's twists and turns without losing his balance. John's life was never without hardship, yet he never allowed it to disrupt his peace of mind. Through all his trials, he showed us that choosing the right attitude can be the key to facing whatever life brings our way. John embraced acceptance, not because his challenges were easy, but because he understood that labeling each moment as good or bad only added weight. His story reminds us that life is less about controlling what happens and more about learning to find calm amid life's constant changes. As we come to the end of John's journey, we're left with a simple yet powerful invitation. Imagine how different life might feel if we stopped judging every event, every setback, and every blessing as either good or bad, and simply let life unfold. Picture the peace that comes with letting go of the need to decide whether something is a blessing or a misfortune, and instead, embracing a sense of acceptance and trust. So now, I invite you to reflect on this in your own life. The next time you face an unexpected challenge or a sudden change, try to pause. See if you can, just for a moment, withhold judgment. You might discover, as John did, that life becomes lighter, richer, and more meaningful when we stop letting each moment define our happiness. In doing so, we begin to see the wisdom in living fully, embracing every moment without letting it dictate our peace.